Hello, Mysticon. Here we are giving my first author reading to an empty room because it's at 4 o'clock. But you know what? We're still going to give a reading. This is from Going Through the Change, the first of the menopausal superhero novels. One of my favorite scenes, pretty early in, with fan favorite Linda or Leonel Alvarez, shortly after his major transformation. The chapter is Chapter 8, Linda Flexes Her Muscles. Linda held the teacup gently in her hands. It was the last one from her favorite set, the ones with little pink roses and gold edging on the delicate handles. She'd broken all the rest, getting used to her larger, stronger hands as she hid in her house like some kind of hunchback these last few days. She and David had told their children she was very ill. Lupita, the oldest, still called every day, but especially with the way Linda's voice was changing, it wasn't hard to convince her not to come over. Linda sounded terrible. She couldn't actually get her finger inside the tiny handle of the teacup, so she held the entire thing in the palm of her hand, like the tiny bowls the soup comes in at Japanese restaurants. Not pretty, but it worked. She should probably just invest in some bigger mugs, but she hated to give up the reminder of who she used to be. Linda stood suddenly, the motion seeming to make the entire dining room shake. She felt ponderous and huge in this new body, but now, 5 days after the initial transformation, she was finding there were things she liked about it. Crossing to the kitchen, she opened the top cabinet and easily reached the extra box of hibiscus tea she'd stowed there. When she put it up there a month or so ago, she'd had to haul out the folding step stool from the garage to reach the shelf. Even better, when she had dropped a sock behind the washing machine while trying to get the thrift shop smell out of the new clothes David had picked up for her, it had been a simple thing to tug it out away from the wall and reach behind it with her new long arms to pull it out. There had been a pleasure in exerting her muscles that way, a pleasure she had never taken in lifting the 10 and 20 pound weights she used at the gym to fight upper arm wobble. She wondered how strong she was now. A washing machine was a heavy thing, and she had tugged it forward with one hand, like it was nothing. Linda went back to the dining room and looked at the piano. It had been in the same corner for 15 years, ever since she and David bought it for their youngest daughter, who said she wanted to learn to play. Bibiana had never learned to play. She had lost interest within weeks, and the piano had sat there collecting dust and knickknacks ever since. David always put her off about getting rid of it. "It's too heavy to move," he'd complained. Was it? Linda wondered. Was it really too heavy? Quickly, she moved all the little objects from the top and laid them gently on the dining room table, working as rapidly as she could without breaking all the little pieces of ceramic her children and grandchildren had made. She made short work of the surface and then stood looking at the piano another minute or so, hands on her hips. It was what they called a studio piano. Plain brown wood, without much decorative detail, but quite solid. Her brothers still grumbled about all the aches and pains it gave them to move it into the dining room from the little moving truck she'd hired to haul it across town. Jorge swore it was the start of all his back problems. But men were such babies. They acted like every little ache and pain was the end of the world. Linda knew it couldn't be that bad. She blew on her hands and bent at the knees like she'd seen the men do whenever there was heavy lifting to be done. She put her hands under the keyboard and lifted. There was the smallest feeling of resistance and a cracking sound. She let go. That wasn't going to work. She'd just end up yanking the keyboard off. What if she lifted it from the top? She put a hand between the piano and the wall and pulled it out into the room. The little metal wheels screeched, but the piano moved. Linda wondered vaguely if the wheels were rusted immobile. She stretched her arms out and grabbed the two ends of the piano at the top. The piano lifted off the ground easily, but then the top flopped open and she dropped it, cringing at the sounds of all the insides crashing. That couldn't be good for the soundboard. The problem was, there just wasn't really a good way to get a grip on the thing. Linda stalked around the piano, thinking. She moved to one end and sort of hugged the piano, one arm along the dusty back that had been against the wall, and one arm towards the front, where the music would have sat. She squeezed her arms toward each other, thinking of a pair of tongs, or maybe a pair of pliers. She stretched one leg out behind her and pulled the piano towards her chest. To her great surprise, the instrument shifted in her grip, and suddenly, Linda was standing in her dining room with a piano in her hands. "Ha!" she cried aloud. "Ha!" She walked towards the front door with a sort of shuffling step, leading with the hip, leaning the piano toward her chest so as not to damage the walls. Once she cleared the doorway into the living room with its higher ceilings, She sort of shrugged the piano up higher so she could take more of the weight on her shoulder. This is easy, she thought. Linda set the piano down when she got to the foyer, leaned against it, and contemplated the door for a moment. She hadn't ventured out much yet. In fact, she'd been a hermit since it happened, afraid to be seen by the neighbors if she did so much as weed her garden. Where was she going to go with the piano? And that's where we'll stop.